Who makes the best perpetual calendar? Patek Philippe, FP Journe, or Lange? Today we're going to find out. A perpetual calendar has always been my personal favorite grand complication. The reason is that it's one of the most wearable watches you could possibly have that encapsulates more complicated end of watchmaking. You can wear these pieces on an everyday basis without it being massively thick or fragile on your wrist. Today we're taking a look at 3 different perpetual calendars, one from Patek Philippe, one from FP Journe, and one from Lange. And we're going to use this as a method of examining the different philosophies that each brand applies when designing a perpetual calendar, and hopefully make it easier for you to decide which watch is best for you. First up is the classic perpetual calendar layout, pioneered by Patek Philippe with the reference 3940. 3940 is one of my personal favorite watches of all time. We've previously done a video, which I'll link to above. But for the highlights, this is a 36mm watch with a really thin 8.5mm case and a classic 3-register display, which Patek actually debuted on this reference, but now is commonplace across the industry, both for Patek Philippe, Vacheron, Audemars Piguet, and even a Lange as well with the Lange Perpetual, but we'll get to that a little bit later. This 3-register display has all of the calendar functionalities displayed simultaneously on the dial, and then a pointer in each of the sub-registers will indicate the correct day, correct month, correct date, and moon phase, etc. If you're looking for the most conventional layout of a perpetual calendar, the 3940 is likely the best watch you could possibly find. The 36mm case is incredibly wearable for an everyday watch, and 8.5mm means that the watch easily slides under dress cuffs, and it's incredibly wearable because of its more compact proportions and automatic winding movement within. This watch is powered by the caliber 240Q, which is one of Patek's most famous micro-rotor movements, and it's part of the reason that Patek manages to preserve the slender case proportions. I think of the 3 watches we're going to discuss today, this is probably the most wearable in an everyday context. And it really comes down to those wonderful proportions on the wrist. And I think that that's where this watch really shines. If you're looking for a conventional perpetual calendar, you can't do much better than the 3940. FP Journe is one of the few brands that I think has managed to completely reimagine the perpetual calendar. And he started with sort of the blueprint of the 3940 and the conventional perpetual calendar display. But one of the things he was trying to target was the fact that he felt that this display put a lot of information that you don't actually need on the dial. What do we mean by that? When you look at the 3940 dial, all of the calendar functionalities are displayed simultaneously on the dial. What this means is that there's a lot of information on the dial that's not being used on a daily basis, because when it's March, you also have April displayed on this dial. And he felt that this was a more cluttered display that would have a more busy effect on the wrist. And what he wanted to do was simplify the perpetual calendar. And that is really the thesis that led to the FP Journe Quantième Perpetual. And I think that very few brands managed to improve upon the perpetual calendar layout, and I think that Journe has tastefully and thoughtfully done so. And I want to explain what I mean by this. Journe borrowed from vintage Patek Philippe wristwatches and pocket watches. For example, the wristwatch reference 3448, one of the most famous Patek Philippe early wristwatches, and he used aperture displays for the Quantième Perpetual. So on the top of the dial, we have the day and the month. And on the bottom of the dial, we have the date display. But again, the devil's in the details with this watch. Journe grew the date display at 6 o'clock much larger than the day of the week and the month. And therefore, he created some hierarchy in the complication by making the most convenient and prime real estate on the dial allocated to the complication that would be most likely to be used. And I think when you look into this, you get a sense of how Journe designs his watches with functionality in mind. And the result is an incredibly uncluttered and simple, legible dial that certainly simplifies the display of the 3940 in a thoughtful and well-intentioned way. I think that that's what makes this watch incredibly successful. The Quantième Perpetual is made in 40mm and 42mm sizes, and I think that it's perhaps a little bit more imposing on the wrist than the 3940, but it's part of the Octa collection, which means that it's an automatic winding watch, which would do just fine on an everyday basis with a relatively slender profile and relatively compact dimensions. So slightly larger than the 3940. If you like this style, you're going to be in excellent shape with the Quantième Perpetual by FP Journe. Our last watch is not Lange's only perpetual calendar, but it's the Lange 1 Perpetual. I want to talk about why I chose this watch. The flagship perpetual calendar for A. Lange & Söhne is probably the Lange Perpetual. And it follows the design language that we are used to on the 3940 and just putting a slight Lange twist on it with an outsized date at 12 o'clock. It's an excellent watch. And I think if you're looking for a 3940 layout and want something more Germanic, that's when you go to the Lange Perpetual. But the watch that I think really showcases Lange's excellence, perhaps more than the Lange Perpetual, is the Lange 1 Perpetual calendar. And I want to talk about why I think this watch is one of the most underrated perpetual calendars on the market. Once again, much like FP Journe, Lange managed to simplify the display of the perpetual calendar into an existing architecture with the Lange 1. And I think that Lange, more than any other brand, has managed to build a design ethos with the Lange 1 that makes it instantly recognizable, such that before you even know what complications lie on this dial, you know that this is a Lange 1. And that recognition is absolutely brilliant. But what makes it even more impressive is that Lange tastefully incorporated these different calendar functionalities in a way that's not only convenient on the dial, but also works mechanically. And that's something that's very hard to do. So you start with design and you build backwards, and you have a watch that is mechanically complicated, but also incredibly legible. So when we look at the actual display, we have the month outbound with a little pointer at 6 o'clock indicating the current month. So on this watch, for example, it would indicate that currently it is April. In this little window at the bottom, you have the leap year cycle, the year within the leap year cycle. You have an outsized date, which again gives you some of the added functionality that we saw in FP Journe in terms of having your date be in a prime real estate location. You have a moon phase down at 7 o'clock. The day of the week has taken the place of the power reserve, where we typically have a power reserve on the Lange 1. Now we have the day of the week in pointer style, and then we have our classic time display. So again, looks like a Lange 1 from a distance, but when you look closely, you see that they've excellently incorporated all of the features that you want to see on a perpetual calendar within the display. The one setback with this watch is it is significantly chunkier and larger than the other watches. This would be probably the least comfortable of the three if you were looking for a daily wearer. And I think that that really comes down to the automatic winding movement. And again, working on a design first, where you start with a wonderfully designed dial, you have to make concessions sometimes on the movement side. And as a result, you have a slightly thicker case than you'd have on these other two watches. So let's go through the major strengths and weaknesses of each of these watches. First, with the 3940, I think we said, as before, this is the watch that built the blueprint for the modern perpetual calendar. And I think if you want something historically significant and incredibly wearable for an everyday watch, I don't think you beat the 3940 with any of these pieces. If you're looking for something incredibly simple on the dial that has a decidedly FP Journe tint to it, that can also be worn in an everyday context thanks to its automatic winding movement within, I think FP Journe has one of the best designed perpetual calendars on the market. He didn't just go with the mold that everyone else does, going with the 3-register display. He instead said, what can I contribute to the world of perpetual calendars? And that's how you have a watch that has its own unique personality. And I think that that's where this watch excels. And if you're looking for something that I think perhaps better than any other has a recognizable time display that is independent of the perpetual calendar functionalities, in other words, you know that this is a Lange 1 by immediately looking at it, I think that the Lange 1 perpetual calendar is probably Lange's best perpetual calendar from a design standpoint. It's definitely the hardest to wear in an everyday context, but I think that this particular configuration in rose gold with a gray dial is one of the most striking and warm combinations, and I think that it takes everything that we love about a Lange & Söhne and makes it into an ideal complicated wristwatch. So there you have it. Which of these would you want between Patek Philippe FP Journe and Lange & Söhne? Each one has its own added benefits, and I should say that I'm, for the most part, not paying attention to price. And the reason is that when you're looking at perpetual calendars and high complication watches, to some extent, when you say which one is the best, you have to put the price a little bit on the back burner, because what we're trying to analyze is the best of the watchmaking industry. And small details wind up having a very big impact on price points. So a variety of different takes on the perpetual calendar. Each one has its unique qualities, and I think that you can't go wrong either way. But let us know down below which one you think is the best: Patek Philippe, FP Journe, or Lange & Söhne.